I'm very pleased to introduce Kay Holcamp. Professor Kay Holcamp grew up in St. Louis, Missouri, where she worked part-time during high school and college as a keeper at the St. Louis Zoo. She received her undergraduate training in animal behavior at Smith College in Northampton, Massachusetts, and her PhD in behavioral biology at the University of California, Berkeley. Dr. Holcamp received postdoctoral training in endocrinology at the University of California at Santa Cruz, then became a research associate in the Department of Mammalogy and Ornithology at the California Academy of Sciences in San Francisco. In that capacity, she initiated her field work on spotted hyenas in Kenya in early 1988. And that work has continued without interruption to the present time. The MSU Mara Hyena Project is now largely staffed by MSU graduate students. Dr. Holcamp joined the MSU faculty in 1992. She is now a University Distinguished Professor of Integrative Biology and also a core member of the university's interdisciplinary program in ecology, evolution, and behavior. She was also a director of that program for some years and did a great job of bringing that to the forefront. She has won the highest awards possible in the fields of behavioral ecology and mammalogy and multiple awards for her teaching. She is also a member of the American Academy of Arts and Sciences, which is one of the most prestigious organizations in the country, and a fellow of the American Association for the Advancement of Science. Please join me in welcoming Professor Kay Holcamp.
Thanks very much. Yeah, so what I wanted to tell you about today was some of the research that my students and I have been doing over the years on these creatures, which, as Phil said, are spotted hyenas. And as you can imagine, these creatures have a very big public relations problem. And that is, people think they're awful. So this started many centuries ago. Here's a 12th century Latin bestiary where we see a hyena robbing a grave and eating a human corpse. Here we have Ernest Hemingway in the 20th century writing about the hyena. It's a hermaphroditic devourer of the dead, potential biter off of your face at night while you sleep, sad yowler, stinking, foul with jaws that crack the bones the lion leaves, belly dragging, loping away on the brown plain. And most recently, of course, we have Walt Disney to thank for these kinds of public images right up until just a couple of years ago. And yet, despite the societal disdain for these creatures, all of these MSU students and many, many others have fallen in love with these animals, and I want to try and tell you why today. So here's the class agenda. I want to first tell you a little bit about how we study spotted hyenas, and then I want to explain why we do it, because that's the thing most people can't get their heads around. Okay, so these are creatures that live in big, stable social groups called clans. The first guy to go study them systematically came from Scotland. Therefore, he was able to call these groups clans. All the members of a clan know one another individually. They defend a common territory, and they also, these creatures live in these big, stable social groups, and all the members of a group know one another individually, and they defend a common territory, and they rear their cubs together at a communal den. So my students and I have been studying these creatures out in the Masai Mara National Reserve, which is a game park in southwest Kenya, right on the Tanzanian border here. This is the Tanzanian border. We work with 6 different social groups that range in size from 40 animals to 130 individuals. And this is an area, as you can see, of equatorial open grassland that supports lots of herbivores, and the herbivores in turn support lots of carnivores. And so we know every hyena individually in each of our study groups based on their unique patterns of spots and ear damage, like this guy here. You'd never confuse that animal for any other, would you? So we sit and watch these animals several hours every day in vehicles like this, to which the hyenas are obviously very well habituated. They've mostly grown up with us. And every once in a while, we actually, in the lifetime of each hyena, immobilize it and take a bunch of measurements and samples and so forth. And this has been a really nice opportunity for a lot of MSU undergraduates who have come out on our study abroad class, and we routinely have immobilized hyenas for them, and a lot of them are pre-vet, so they've enjoyed these experiences quite a lot. And sometimes when we immobilize them, we put radio collars on, and then we track them with tracking gear that's mounted on the tops of our cars. But more recently, we've actually been putting these very fancy radio collars on that actually generate a GPS location, a fix every second for the entire life of the collar. And so here you're seeing 6 adult female hyenas ranging in rank from high up here at Bora to Rath down here who's red. And the den right now is about in here. You're looking at an area about 100 square kilometers, and you can see that they actually come together at the den, but they go apart, especially these lower ranking ones. The purple girl, Magenta, comes out here. The red girl up here, she goes off to forage alone. That's how one of the mechanisms they use to compete with one another. So what I want to move on to right now is to explain why in the world we study these creatures that everyone thinks are so awful. Well, the first interesting thing about these animals is that they exhibit rather extraordinary immune function. These down here are anthrax bacteria, and spotted hyenas are routinely known to go through the savannas after an anthrax epidemic sweeps through the herbivore populations there, and they can consume 15 kilos of meat in a half an hour and don't even experience indigestion, much less die, as most of us would do if we ate anything like that. And they're remarkably resistant to viral diseases. There have been epidemics of canine distemper and rabies that have swept through other carnivore populations in our area. And we know that the animals are testing seropositive for these viruses, so they've seen them, but they don't exhibit symptoms. And we've seen them on multiple occasions get bitten in the face by big poisonous snakes. And then, they act sick for a day or two, and then they're fine. They're truly pretty amazing. So that's the Army's been very interested in this particular, given their resistance to toxins, and they've been supporting some of our work in this area. Another thing that's really interesting about these creatures is their extreme morphological adaptations. And here, for example, I'm showing you hyenas eating in the top photo, a hippo head, and in the bottom, this is a giraffe femur here, this giant bone that's about 7 centimeters in diameter. And this young hyena can't master that, but an adult hyena can break one of those things open. And that's pretty incredible, given that, you and I can't even break open an ice cube. But what they do is to put a big bone right in between these teeth, these big premolar teeth here, and then they can exert pretty fantastic forces with all the musculature that attaches to all these bony protuberances on the skull. And look at this dental enamel on their teeth. You're looking at a scanning electron micrograph cut through a cross-section of a hyena tooth, and here's the dentin on the inside of the tooth, and this is all the enamel, and you're never going to see any enamel like this on any other creatures except bone-cracking hyenas. Look at these big W-shaped bands that interlock as the enamel's laid down. And that stuff is really hard to crack. And there are various automotive industrial people in Detroit who are really interested to try to develop a paint that has the same kind of properties of crack resistance as these. But look at this. These animals can actually put something the size of a cow femur, which is trivial for a hyena. They can totally polish off an entire cow femur. I've done this experimentally in 13 minutes. And they put it, just as I've mentioned, right against this tooth. And then their skulls are designed to actually dissipate the stresses of exerting these fantastic forces. We know how much force they can exert to break open a cow femur, for example, because we brought some home and put them in an Instron device and exerted force to see how many newtons of force it took to crack open a cow femur. And here's what it takes, folks. It's a tremendous amount of force. And given those capabilities, these hyenas feeding on a 300-pound antelope can reduce it from something that looks like this animal to something that looks like this in only as little as 15 minutes. It's quite extraordinary. They eat very fast. And they actually play extremely important roles in African ecosystems. And that's another reason that we have been working on them all these years. A lot of people seem to think still that spotted hyenas live on this kind of stuff. And it's certainly true that spotted hyenas and other bone-cracking hyenas can break open these bones and actually benefit from the marrow and other materials inside the bones, and they can completely digest them. But like you or me, given a choice between this and a steak on the hoof, the hyenas would always rather have this. And in fact, this is the menu from which our hyenas choose daily when they want to go get something to eat. And they are, in fact, surprisingly good hunters. They don't look like they're going to be because they're sort of funny looking. They're slopey backs and the shorter hind legs in front, but they can actually run. We've driven along them at over 55 kilometers per hour. They can actually catch creatures like zebras. And zebras are one of a few things that they actually typically have to hunt in groups because it's really hard to catch zebras. But look at all these pictures. I'm showing you 4 different cases where this hyena, a single adult hyena, can easily bring down another 300-pound animal all by itself. They're very good hunters. Their success rate is just as good as cheetahs or lions or wolves. But look at this, they're only 1/3 the size of their prey. And I think hyenas have, one reason they have such a terrible reputation is because the African savannas are a fairly dangerous place to be walking around at night. So all the local people and all the people who colonized Africa routinely lock themselves into their shelters at night. And then they come out in the morning and they come across a scene that looks like this, where you have big, glamorous, handsome lion feeding on a carcass and these miserable hyenas skulking around in the background. Well, if you're the hyena biologist, though, and you get out there a little bit earlier, here's what you see. You see the hyenas run down this Toby. They have possession of it for basically 4 minutes. And then this adult male lion comes over and steals from them. And in fact, lions steal from hyenas way more often than hyenas steal from lions. And in fact, lions are the main mortality source historically for these animals. And these days, though, unfortunately, humans are responsible for most of the deaths of spotted hyenas and other large carnivores. And because the human population is growing and the livestock that go with the pastoralist population is growing, there's getting to be some conflicts there. So the local tribe around the park where we work are the Maasai tribe, and there's very tall, handsome pastoralist people. And but their population and the population of their livestock doubles every 15 years. So it's changing very rapidly. And we're seeing more and more cases of human or livestock hyena conflict. And sometimes the hyenas win, like in this case, the hyenas managed to kill a very skinny cow. Much more often than not, though, the hyenas are the losers in this. And here you're seeing a snare made out of the wires that have been pulled out of steel belted radial tires, and they're turned into these nooses, and the local people put them in holes in their village fencing so that if a hyena wants to go in, it has to force its head through this thing. And then they just continue to tighten and bite into the hyena's neck such that they get some pretty bad, very bad cuts over time. And in fact, hyenas aren't the only things that are affected. You can see a zebra's been caught in a snare here. This hyena was speared when it went into this village, and that's, that is a death penalty offense there. I understand the local people when they actually go in. But here you have a lion being poisoned by an insecticide called Furadan, and we've lost as many as 25 hyenas in a single morning to a poisoning event, and that happens, every couple of years we have a couple of those. But these animals are by all means the most abundant large carnivores in Africa anywhere. They occur everywhere south of this line of tropics, everywhere, basically in sub-Saharan Africa, except the very wettest areas of the center of the continent. And look at this range of habitats that they occupy. This is Okavango Delta up here, but it's basically a big swamp. Here's montane forests in the Aberdare Mountains. Here's the Namibian desert in southwestern Africa. And here's the kind of plains where we work in Eastern Africa that are loaded with game. And because these animals are a lot more easygoing ecologically than any other carnivore out there, they actually turn out to be a very good keystone species, an ecosystem sentinel, if you will. And one reason for this is that whereas a lot of the carnivores out there only reproduce once per year at a specific season, and they're only active either in the daytime or in the nighttime, hyenas don't care. They can be active day or night. They breed year round. That's not an issue. They also can survive on any of the creatures that are shown in this photograph. We've seen them eat all of these things and about 30 other things. That they're very easygoing, and they can actually get by on all kinds of stuff that other carnivores can't. But because these are so much more flexible ecologically than the other carnivores out there, we're using them as ecosystem sentinels throughout the continent, such that if you see spotted hyenas going away from an ecosystem where they historically occurred, that's a very bad sign of environmental degradation. And then one of my favorite reasons for studying spotted hyenas is that they can actually teach us a lot about how and why intelligence evolved. And here we're trying to explain why it is that some of us, creatures on the surface of the earth, have big brains and great intelligence. Because neural tissue, as you know, is very expensive. So why would you have this big mass of such expensive tissue in your head if you didn't need it? So the fact is that relative to most other animals, including most other mammals, primates in particular have relatively large brains and sophisticated cognition. So the question that we've been trying to address with these animals is, why is that? And the primatologists have been testing these hypotheses for some years, and we've been following along in their footsteps, where everything that they find about their animals, we ask, okay, can our hyenas do these same things? So the first hypothesis that was put forward by the primatologists derived from things like Jane Goodall's observations of chimpanzees fishing for termites, making tools of this sort to do so, and these observations of chimpanzees in Western Africa using a hammer and anvil configuration to break open hard nuts in the West. So the idea here is that big brains and great intelligence allow animals to cope with challenges of dealing with the physical environment. then the other popular hypothesis among the primatologists is that big brains and great intelligence function to help animals cope with complexity in the social environment. And the idea here is that relative to the physical environment, the social environment's very labile and it changes every second. And if you actually evolve the ability to anticipate or perhaps even manipulate the behavior of your group mates, that could give you a very big fitness advantage in the long term. So we've been actually testing both these hypotheses in our animals, and it started with a test of the social complexity hypothesis based on the following logic. If the big brains and great intelligence found in primates actually evolved as in response to social complexity, then we ought to see in non-primate mammals living in primate-like societies the same kinds of features in their intelligence and their brains as monkeys. And so I became particularly interested in this because we've been studying hyenas long enough at this point to see that their societies are remarkably odd relative to other carnivores. So these animals occur in these big clans that just don't look anything like the societies of any other carnivore you can think of. So they don't look like canid packs, they don't look like lion prides, they don't look like mongoose groups. These are all really tiny societies composed mainly of animals who are closely related to one another. So they're mainly cooperating and competing with close kin. And that's actually, it gives a lot of advantages in terms of being favored by kin selection. But instead of being like that, spotted hyena societies look much more like the societies of baboons or macaques insofar as the way the societies are structured in particular. And the reason we know this is because every single time we've gone out to watch hyenas, every single day since May of 1988, we've recorded every single interaction that looks like this one. And what you're seeing is a fight between Cochise on the left with Oliver Twist on the right. These are two adult female hyenas. Cochise has just brought her cub, this little black thing, to the den, and Oliver Twist is just interested in it, and Cochise is being defensive of it. So she's lunging up out of this hole at Oliver Twist. Her ears are cocked forward, eyes wide open. By contrast, Oliver Twist has her ears plastered back. She's squinting to protect her eyes, tails down between her legs, and her whole body's crouched down and bent around towards Cochise in a very classic hyena appeasement posture. And it's because Oliver Twist is submitting in response to Cochise's aggression that we refer to Oliver Twist as the loser in this fight and Cochise as the winner. Simple, right? But what that allows us to do, because we've recorded every single occurrence of those that's in our presence, and we go out and watch hyenas every day that weather allows. So that's a lot of observations. We now have many tens of thousands of these fights in our database. And what having them allows us to do is generate a crystal clear picture of the social structure given in any given time period within our larger study. So here what you're seeing is a dominance hierarchy for one group of spotted hyenas, where we've organized these animals from Murphy here, who can win against all the other hyenas in the group, down to Boston here, who cannot win against anybody else in the whole group. And what the numbers in the matrix represent are the number of fights that we've seen between each members of each dyad, where there was a clear winner and a clear loser. And as you can see, there are very few fight outcomes that are inconsistent with the rank ordering that we have assigned here. So we've got them as winners up here, losers over here, and the numbers in the matrix are the numbers of fights that we've seen. And what this looks like remarkably, if you know primate biology, is it looks just like a troop of baboons or a troop of macaques, with the interesting exception of this fact, where all the adult breeding males are down at the very bottom of the hierarchy. They're the lowest ranking animals in the society, and the females are breeding up on top. And that is very unusual for a mammalian society. So what happens is your position in that dominance hierarchy determines your priority of access to food, and priority of access to food determines your reproductive success if you are a female spotted hyena. And I just want to give you a dramatic example of that. Here you're looking at Barbara, this big hyena here, and Batman. And Barbara is a cub that was born to our alpha female, the highest ranked female. And then Batman was born to our 19th ranked female. These girls were born just a couple of days apart, and this is what they looked like when they were 6 months old. You can see by virtue of the fact that Barbara's mother can waltz into any kill made by any hyena in the whole society, displace them from it, eat it, turn it into milk for Barbara, and Barbara basically has access to ad lib food, and Batman's mother has a whole different set of hyenas ahead of her. So her priority of access to food is terrible, and Batman grows more slowly. She starts breeding later in life. So her whole reproductive lifespan is shorter. Everything works in favor of alpha animals. So in all these respects, we've got similarities between old world primate biology, their societies, and spotted hyena societies. So we set out to inquire whether there are also similarities in social cognition. And the short answer to that is yes, absolutely. And I just want to show you how we learn these kinds of things. Here I'm showing you one of our very first playback experiments where we are following in the footsteps of a couple of primatologists who did playback experiments to inquire whether adult female vervet monkeys could recognize the distress calls of their offspring in particular. So we found that, the primatologists found that yes, they could. That's an important social cognitive ability. And so we wanted to know if the hyenas could do this also. So here we're testing hyenas that are roughly 100 meters away over there. We've got speakers hidden here so the hyena can't see them. And we broadcast distress vocalizations of a particular cub to its mother and its other kin and other unrelated hyenas. And I just want to show you how dramatic these kinds of experiments can be in terms of their responses. So we had two different response measures, just the amount of time that the hyenas that we were playing the distress call to spent looking at the speaker and the amount of time that they actually spent searching for the distressed cub. And look at this. This is just broken down by how closely related the listeners are to the distressed cub. So this one, where they're sharing half their genes roughly, is full sibs and mothers and fathers. And here we have grandparents and half sibs, and here we have cousins and so forth. And here we have animals that basically share no more genes than I do with the dean. So that's essentially unrelated, right? And you can see that these animals do not waste 1 second looking for those distressed cubs. Only their kin do that. So these animals are listening to things in their environment and making adaptive decisions about how to respond. So we know that, for example, hyenas, like many monkeys, for a long time, primatologists thought that only monkeys were capable of doing things like forming coalitions. That turns out not to be true. Even fiddler crabs can form coalitions. So it's not surprised that hyenas can do so, but it's one of many forms of cooperation in these animals. And we know already, I've shown you that they cooperate when they hunt. They also cooperate to defend their food against other competitors. And what my colleagues here at MSU and I have been trying to do is to watch and learn from the hyenas to develop algorithms that say what things are actually likely to promote the probability that these hyenas are going to talk to one another and communicate. Because right now, robotics is not very far along in terms of how sophisticated robots are in terms of their ability to cooperate and communicate with one another. And yet, so what my MSU colleagues and I hope to do is actually someday allow these visions of these various Hollywood producers to actually exist with intelligent machines that can do things that allow them to cooperate and communicate with us and other machines. So my very favorite reason, I just want to tell you about this in the last couple of minutes, is that these hyenas appear to violate a lot of different basic rules of mammalian biology. And my belief is that if we actually study creatures like this, we can find out what the rules really are, because there are rules. And here's a basic rule that Darwin noticed many years ago. He published this in 1871, where he said, if you look around at a lot of different groups of animals, including most mammals, you see that there's a suite of sex differences that are very characteristic. And here, for example, you're looking at some elk where the male he's much larger than his girlfriends here. He has a lot more muscle mass, a lot more hemoglobin to aerate those muscles. He's got these weapons that the females lack altogether. And to use Darwin's word, the males are more pugnacious. And that means if you were to sit out in nature here and watch these elk over the course of an annual cycle, you would see males emitting aggressive acts at much higher frequencies and intensities than females. And that is true not only of creatures like this elk, but also most herbivorous ungulates, most marine mammals, including all these seals where there's a huge sex difference in weaponry and size. It's true in most primates, including our own species. And it's even true in most other gregarious carnivores. And yet I have to show you this X-rated photo of hyenas so that you know which is the male and which is the female. They are remarkably monomorphic, and the monomorphism is carried to such a crazy extreme. These are female spotted hyenas. These are young ones. Here's an old one who's greeting with this collared animal on the left. And to greet, they lift their leg and each animal sniffs the other's anogenital region. And you can see very clearly here that her vaginal labia are folded over and filled with connective tissue to form a structure that remarkably resembles a male scrotum. And this thing is actually her clitoris, which is enormously elongated to form this fully erectile pseudopenis through which she urinates, copulates, and gives birth. And this is really a huge biological mystery. Why do they have that? We don't know. We're still working on it. But you can tell that this female's even had a litter because they give birth to a cub that weighs 1 kilo. And she urinates, copulates, and gives birth through this thing, guys. It's really amazing. And there's a natural episiotomy that occurs, of course, here. And she has a baby, and it's just fine. Internally, spotted hyenas look pretty much like domestic dogs and cats, for example, except that where in your domestic animals, the vaginal canal would exit the body under the tail. This is the only mammal that has no external vaginal opening, and the reproductive tract makes a hairpin turn here and exits the body through this bizarre tube. So it is really strange. And in addition, we see all these other bizarre role reverse sex differences where, for example, here's a female and here's a male being following her. And you can see that they're roughly the same shoulder height, for example, but the female's a lot brawnier creature. And males seldom fight. I've shown you already that females are socially dominant to males, but males in the species hardly ever fight. The females are highly aggressive and fight all the time, particularly over food. So I've shown you a number of different reasons, giving you a real quick vignette showing you why it is that spotted hyenas are so interesting, at least to me. And I hope at the very least I've convinced you that these kind of images of the animals aren't quite right. There's actually a recent book out about our research that your grandchildren and kids might like. It's actually paints a truer picture of the animals. And I want to argue that these animals offer good model systems for addressing a lot of different questions in mammalian biology. And we are very proud to have all of these journal covers because people find the animals really interesting. And there you go. Thanks very much.